So, I'm a student at the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies. And I'm talking today about the social movement that took place in Sri Lanka almost 3 years ago. And it's Rise and Fall. My paper is titled Rise and Fall of the Struggle, Aragalaya in Sri Lanka. Aragalaya is struggle in Sinhalese. Okay, I'll start with the land acknowledgement because I'm grateful to be living and working here. I acknowledge that I live, work, and raise my children on Tiruvar territory, the traditional lands of Anjanawe, Ninivet, Anjanawe, Lakota, Ayake, and Deni, and on the national homeland of Lady Ometi. I respect the treaties made on these territories, recognize them as harms and mistakes of the past, and commit to moving forward in partnership with the indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Positionality of my research in this particular work. In 2022, Sri Lanka went through a social, economic, and political crisis. There were queues to get food, to get fuel, to get gas, and these queues varied from days to weeks. And I was living in Sri Lanka at this time. And one day, I took my daughter for swimming after school, and I was the only parent courageous to take my daughter to swimming. And I was the only parent there. And after swimming, we came out and we tried to get a cab using a rideshare app. And there were no cabs. There were no tuk-tuks. We couldn't get anything on the road. And then we tried to get on the public transport, and the transport was full. We had to walk home 7 kilometers through unsafe neighborhoods. That was the situation. The situation was very bad. And the protest that started as candlelight vigils and simple protest here and there moved on to a social movement. And we were active participants of these protests. And so my positionality is based on the lived experiences and what I experienced at this particular time. So I'm interested in nonviolence, and there are two strands of nonviolence, which is the Gandhian nonviolence, which is principled nonviolence, and the nonviolence that is theorized by Gene Sharp, which is pragmatic nonviolence. And I see principled nonviolence as motivated intrinsically, based on intrinsic motivation, and pragmatic nonviolence, which is motivated extrinsically. And this particular research is based on Sharp's theory on pragmatic nonviolence. And I look at the methods that people used during this social movement based on nonviolent protest and persuasion, non-cooperation, and nonviolent innovation. I asked questions. How did Sri Lankans wage a nonviolent resistance against the government during the Aragalaya, and how did the Aragalaya form itself as a revolutionary social movement? I use social constructivism as people act and behave based on the meanings that the things around them have to them. And I use text analysis and my lived experiences. Sri Lanka is an interesting country. If you know about it, it had violent as well as non-violent struggles throughout its history post-independence in 1948 from British. We had a general Hartal in August 1953, which resulted in the resignation of our Prime Minister. The second Hartal, which was in 1980s, didn't result in any resignation of the government officials. It just resulted in loss of jobs of around 40,000 people. And also we've had ethnic minorities having quite a few non-violent protests throughout the history. But we've also had violent resistance by mainly majority Sinhalese as well as minority Tamil youth. The majority Sinhalese had a few insurrections which resulted in deaths and disappearance of around 30 to 100,000 people. And whereas the violent resistance from the minority went on to like 26 years long civil war, taking out 100,000 lives and 800,000 internally displacing around 800,000 people. And all the photos that I use are the photos that were taken during the Aragalaya movement. The Aragalaya took place from March to August 2022, and it started, as I said, as daily candlelight vigils, and it began by twice weekly protests, and it went on to protests in front of President's house, which was around 6 kilometers away from my own house. And it moved on to open fires for people who were protesting, and people started having encampments, and the encampment sites were attacked, and it went on like that. And finally, in July 2022, close to a million protesters came to the capital, which is like 1 out of 22 of the total population of the country. And if you can see, there were clashes between protesters and police throughout, and there were 3 states of emergencies declared in the country. And finally, following these big, huge clashes between the protesters and the government or the police, the cabinet resigned, then the prime minister resigned, then the brother of the president resigned, and the president resigns. But I don't know whether you know a little bit about the country. At this time, we were heading towards an autocratic regime, and the country had a Rajapaksa regime. Right? So the Rajapakshas, the president was Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the prime minister was Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was president twice before, and then the cabinet had the son of the prime minister and 2 other brothers of the prime minister. So it was like the huge thing when the Rajapaksa started deciding, and the president was also known as the Terminator. Yeah, I see. So I will start with non-violent protests and persuasion. So most violent protests were done by millennials and Gen Z people, and the encampment sites were like asterisk comic. So we were growing up watching these comics, and it was like the villagers were like, we are all heroes, we are going to stand up against the government. And the first encampment site was actually on a site that the government dedicated as to have protests in front of the presidential secretariat. It was known as Gota Gogama, the village to chase Gota, the president house. The second one was Maina Gogama, which was in front of the Prime Minister's residence. The village to chase Maina. Maina is the way that people called, in Sinhalese, you call people who think that they are young but they are old, they are called Maina birds, so Maina Gogama. And then we had Horu Gogama in front of the legislature to chase away the thieves, the whole legislature out. And also Lord Gama, the one who came to the Prime Minister who was appointed after the president left, because he was very famous on corruption. So social media influencers, YouTubers and bloggers, they started streaming. There was a very vibrant atmosphere. There was a library, community kitchen, daycare center in these encampment sites. Very interesting. And the first 2 months, this was like a carnival. There were people coming, there were theater workshops with famous theater directors, there were music videos by famous YouTube streamers, reputed musicians came and had musical shows, and it was inclusive and there was equal participation. There were disabled people, ex-combatant, and there was the first ever pride parade in the country with 1,000 people participating. It also commemorated East attacks of the country. I don't know whether you are aware, there was coordinated attacks against the Christian churches as well as 5-star hotels, which took 200 lives about 2 years before that. So an actor walked from one of the churches that was attacked to the Gota Gogama site with a cross on his shoulders, barefooted, and it was very inspiring. And also, for the first time in the south, they mourned the death in the north, people who died in the north. in the south, which was, yeah, and it was very, and there were chants against the Rajapaksa regime, like very, very interesting things. Like one day when I was in my office, my colleague was chanting, Basil, 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 kaputu, kak, kak, kak. That means she had gone to the protest the day before. And Basil Rajapaksa was a former finance minister, and like in Sri Lanka, you take pride of speaking in English. And like it's a way of class because we were colonized. And in an interview, Basil Rajapaksa named Kaputa without saying crow, he said Kaputa. And it's like, oh, this person who can't speak even English, so go get out. Maybe hear the sound of the crow. And it was a non-partisan struggle. They wanted the whole legislature to step down. So people said we don't need sex. We actually don't. That's our favorite. And the encampment sites had protests and like they had written statements. They did media releases. They highlighted the key demands. They needed the president to step down, cabinet to be limited to 15 people, like take immediate action for the hardship that people are going through. And also there was a citizens forum where they would submitted new proposals to the states, like government officials. There was also then they moved on to non-cooperation. There was economic non-cooperation where there were two general strikes. The country people went on strike across the country, the unions, and there was also political non-cooperation. Like when Gotabaya came into power, he came with a force, like 6.9 million people voted for him, and it was one of like 52% popular vote or something. And they were like, oh my God, it's 6.9 million curse. And then they were like, no, we want him out. We voted into him, but we want him out. And then there were protests amidst curfew, and the government officials joined the protests. And like immigration officers stopped from the Rajapaksas leaving the country at the airport. And also during the final protests, the railways operated across the country to bring people into the capital to protest. There was psychological intervention, people practiced satyagraha, they were fasting, and famous people joined in fasting with normal ordinary people. There were also physical intervention. There were sit-ins and stand-ins, and finally they stormed. There were attacks. So there were attacks against the encampments, people who were protesting, and there were actually a fight back. And on July 9th, people stormed the Prime Minister's office, the Presidential Secretariat, as well as burned down the then Prime Minister's private residence. In terms of non-violent intervention, the social intervention was interesting to see because Sri Lanka is a deeply divided society. The unity of the people along ethnic and religious lines were never seen before. During Ramadan, people were when Muslims broke fast, Christian priests were with them. And the main holidays were celebrated in these encampment sites. The Mullivaikali Remembrance Day is the remembrance of the death during the Civil War. And it was celebrated in the south. So I see Aragalaya as a revolutionary social movement because it resulted, when I drafted this paper, it had only resulted in the resignation of the President, Prime Minister and the Cabinet. The Parliament was going on. But we had an election in November 2024, which resulted in a new party, it's not a new party, but it only had 3 seats, National People's Party, and it won 159 seats out of 225, 2025 legislature. And we had 146 new members in the parliament. That is extraordinary. And also we had more women representation. We had 21 women in the parliament. Okay. I also see this as from out of the four transformation mechanisms that Sharp identifies, it's between nonviolent coercion and disintegration. Because the legislation is now new. But we have to see whether the system change that we aspire to is happening at the moment, because it's the same constitution and the same way of doing things. The V identity to promote the unity through diversity. It's like Sri Lankans are actually, how to say, they are proud people, but they are proud based on their ethnic and religious rights. We are Sinhalese will be proud, we are Sinhalese, Tamils will be proud, we are Tamil. But during Aragalaya, we saw people talking to themselves as Sri Lankans, which was very interesting. Last, in conclusion, if you look at the non-violent interventions during Aragalaya, we see during the first 2 months they used protest and persuasion, and when it's not working out, they went to other methods like non-cooperation and non-violent intervention. I say it's non-violent because I'm coming from a violent society. There were clashes between the non-violent and between the protesters and the government of Sri Lanka, but it didn't go to the extent that we normally experience in our society. And it's a revolutionary movement because it kicked Rajapakshas out of the government. It changed the political atmosphere of the country, which was very interesting. We currently have one Rajapaksa in the government who came from the list, like not elected by the vote. And it created safe spaces. I don't consider my country as safe as you would like to be, but it created safe spaces so that the people can get together and protest. And if there was something not safe happening, people rose up against it. And it created a V identity and promoted unity and diversity for protesters. And it was a successful political process. And finally, when I requested these photos from the photographer who shared it, he was in the encampment site and covering the whole thing, and he shared it with me saying the photos of the struggle of love. So it was a struggle of love by the people in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alalima, for this very, very insightful talk. And now we have time for questions. 1 and 2. We'll collect 2 questions first and then go. Okay? Yes, please.
A question about today. The NPP, the ruling party, from their foundation in this movement, I would assume is a fairly ethnic and religiously diverse party. Its representation in parliament is fair, I don't know if it's balanced or not among the various groups, or if there's rough representation by all of them. And related to that, to what extent have those traditional ethnic and religious divisions, after victory, started to reinsert themselves? Or do you see this as something that has made a really transformative change to Sri Lankan political society?
After 1 year into, actually there was a survey done by Sri Lankan Barometer looking at the identities, like whether people identify themselves as Sri Lankans. And like during the Aragalaya and just after Aragalaya, they identified themselves as Sri Lankans more, but now it's moving away. People are again going back to their divisions, like Sinhalese, Tamil, but it's ironical, but it's going away from the same identity. So people are again getting back to their usual patterns. Now there are no economic and social issues in the country, like people, like there are issues, but like you can live compared to how it was before, like you can get your basic necessities. So like they're moving away from that idea that they had at the beginning. But NPP actually has more representation than before. Like there was a woman from in the hill country we have Indian Tamils who came from India to pluck tea, and they got like, and the representation in that particular region was from one single family, and they were very, you know, elite family. And with this party, a new young girl came from that particular region. So there is an equal representation, and for the first time in the north, NPP won. But in previous elections, the main parties didn't win these regions, but NPP got the support. So people supported them to come back. It's not a fairly new party. It's a coalition of political parties, and this particular Janata Vimukti Peramuna that I called before, like which had a violent resistance some time back by Sinhalese youth, they are the leader party in that particular social, that political party. Yeah.
If I may quickly follow up, are you pessimistic or optimistic about the future?
I am pessimistic. No, maybe I am optimistic personally, and I was actually supporting this particular party way before the whole community supported, because we thought that there would be a change. But it's coming back to the normal trends. When I listen to the normal podcasts and all, it's going back to the normal. But they are accountable, which is very interesting. Like recently they released all the income of all their members of the parties, parliament, which had never happened before. So they are taking accountability, which is very interesting, which I have not seen before.
Thank you, and we have one more question and two questions. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Lalima. This was a very engaging talk. I enjoyed learning about this very much. I was struck by what you describe on the slide as carnivalesque atmosphere.
Oh.
Yeah, so I would like to follow up on that, because in my second life, I'm interested in humor and the uses of humor, and I feel like humor is also often present in political protests. And when you were talking about, how people imitate this one politician, who was trying to mock them, and they mock him right back. So that's an instance of the use of humor. Can you speak a little bit more to that? How sort of the general atmosphere of the movement was using humor or humorous strategies, maybe?
Oh, there were so many humorous strategies. Like they used like the chanting that I said, Basil, Basil, Basil. Like it was going on and on and on. And if I can go back for a few other things that they chanted, like this second one, Gota Gobea, Gota Ge Aya Gobea. Aya Gobea, Aya Ge Puta Gobea. That means Gota, the president is down, and president's elder brother, prime minister, who was president twice, and people was so scared of them. He's also down, and then the brother is down, so his son is also down, who is also in the parliament and who is the minister of youth, and yeah, so like that. It was like such a carnival atmosphere. I think that is what drew the youth to the movement, because they were like we are in the island of the goals, like we are in the village of the goals. We are going to get it done and get this government down. Which was it was like a carnival. When you go there, you have drama, you have art, that youth could express themselves the way they like, which was a very interesting strategy. The movement, there was, like you can say that it was a leaderless movement, but the different people who had different ideas, they brought it into this and they expressed it. And the first LGBTQ protest, which was very interesting, because people are like same-sex relationships are illegal in Sri Lanka. So it was like people coming out. It was a really, yeah. I don't think I can do justice for what happened, like by telling in this particular, yeah.
Thank you, and we have one more question. Yes, please, Stan.
Yeah, thank you, Lalima. I thought that was really also very informative, very interesting in a way how social movements can work. So I have two questions. You didn't, I think you didn't cover that much, so I'm interested in a way how they kind of connect to the question of successful social movements, successful resistance in the categories you described. The one is, was there any, any moment where this could have gone completely differently, so in a way where it would have been kind of whatever, the violence would have been used by the state to strike it down, and why didn't that happen? Because almost any peaceful revolution in a way we know of could have gone another way, in a way at least the ones I know about. So I'm just interested, what were these kind of, what was in your opinion this key moment? And the other one was, I think you described it a bit as a kind of, Sri Lanka as a kind of almost autark kind of moment, the way the people taking back their rights, and then of course with the challenges you just described in a way about what comes after. So what was there any outside interference? Was India kind of ignoring what was going on? So in a way, how is in a way the question of resistance in a way as an autonomous right in a way of the people kind of relating to the bigger global picture in a way?
Yeah. Okay. So for the first question, there was violence. Like they tried to practice. So they tried to impose like the official mechanisms. They tried to impose curfew. They tried to there were police open shooting in one place, and there were a lot of arrests happening. But then after the first incidents, the protest in front of president's private residence, they arrested journalists, and they also arrested protesters. I can't remember the exact number, over 100. And then what happened was the lawyer showed up, providing free consultation in front of when they went to when they were arrested. And when the unions showed up like that, I think government took a moment to think whether this was the correct thing to do. So that was a good strategy, I suppose. And when the second attacks happened on the 9th of May, it was so the Prime Minister's office, who was the former president, Mahinda Rajapaksa, his office was closer to the encampment site. So their supporters went there, and they took not machetes, they took big poles and all, and they came and attacked the people in the encampment site, but the police didn't intervene. So they thought that it will not using those strategies would make the protesters to back up, but they didn't back up. So after this May 9th attack, there were public backlash across the country. A lot of MPs' houses were attacked and all. So then the Prime Minister had to resign. So there were a few incidents, when the state of emergencies were declared, but I think the way they were coming, because there was a unity in our divided society. Where signatories and having both worked, all the ethnic groups worked together, I think they thought that it would not go along. I'm not sure whether India intervened, but the not-for-profit organizations were quite present in encampment sites, giving free medicine, free food. So there was a hand by foreign governments without showing it, without showing it in, how to say it, directly. But I don't think India was involved. Maybe the Western, and I have to look more into it. But because there was Red Cross, the not-for-profits funded by intergovernmental organizations.
Thank you so much.